Hi, I'm Ted Haftegabber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see.
Hi, Jay.
Hi.
How are you?
Welcome to LA.
I know, I'm so glad to be here.
How's it going?
You know, it's day 3.
Yes.
It's day 3 of tour, so I'm still human-shaped. Ask me on day 23, and I'll just be an amorphous blob dressed in black with red glasses. But what's interesting is that this first week of tour, I don't really know what I'm gonna say. Like, you know this, by the end of tour, you have sound bites. You get really comfortable talking about a book, but this book has been in the making for so long, and I'm just starting to speak about it, and so every night something wildly different has come out of my mouth. I have no idea what I'm going to say, so be prepared.
So this is an exclusive.
It's an exclusive, mostly because I have not figured out how to talk about things that I love.
Well, I am excited to talk about this book with you. We are very excited to have you in Los Angeles, aren't we?
Thank you.
I have notes on my phone so that I don't lose my mind.
It's not Candy Crush?
No.
I know, it's fine. It's called multitasking, and most authors, we all do it.
I am so grateful in particular for joining you tonight because I don't think I've mentioned this to you, or this is fresh news, but this particular series was inspiration for me starting my own series. And so your characters are very dear to me. So thank you. Thank you for sharing the stage with me and just letting me selfishly ask you all the things I want to know.
You're so welcome.
I'm excited.
It does not disappoint.
It is incredible. Okay, so this book is utterly delicious. And to be really honest, it was a tall order to beat Addie. Addie was my candy. And then I read literally the first page of this book and I was like,
Thank you.
It is absolutely delicious. No spoilers tonight, but I do like to know, just by a show of hands, who's read?
There's it's been out for 72 hours,
it's
so I
fine.
promise you it's not a problem.
We will not hold it against you if you did not call in sick to work and read this before the end. It's fine.
I feel like I'll be harsher after the weekend, because once you had a weekend, I'm like, no, that's what it's for.
What's your excuse?
Exactly, but we're still midweek.
I like to know that, but we won't do any spoilers.
No.
We'll keep it spoiler-free. Fragile Threads of Power is like a companion book in the Darker Shades series, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a sequel series. My idea is that when it's done, so it's a trilogy, is that one day, when all 6 books are out, you'll be able to decide if you want to start with Threads or start with Shades. So will Shades become the prequel series to Threads, or will Threads be the sequel series to Shades?
The fact that you can write something that is able to be that dynamic is a mark of your genius.
Well, I'm not sure I succeed at it. That's the goal. That's the goal. I think you try to make points of access.
Yes.
But I think, for me personally, and for I know many of you, Shades will always be first. To me, in my dream heart of hearts, this is a book 4 as much as it is a book 1. And I think that you will get the most out of it. You will get all the little nuances out of it because that's the order that I wrote them in. So I don't think I'll ever be able to separate that order. I just am trying to do a good job of making it less daunting.
It will be very cool to see people discover the Threads series first and then dip into Darker and decide how they digest everything.
It's been very surreal because I've had some readers now who have either started with Threads or found me from Addie and then into Threads. And it's hard because as an author and with my editor, I've been with my editor since Vicious, and so we don't physically have the capacity to work on threads without the knowledge of shades. It's just, it's not a world we can ever possess in that way. We can do our best, but it is really exciting when I meet readers who have found me and haven't read shades yet and have started threads and have had a nice experience. Obviously, people who have read shades first feel very strongly that you should read shades first, and that is a very valid opinion.
I am in that camp.
It's a very valid opinion, but it is a relief as a writer when readers who have started with threads have been like, that was so cool, now I can go back.
Yes, and that was one of my questions. Before I get into that, let me, in case you randomly wandered in here and you have no idea what's happening.
Thank you.
Could you, yes, thank you. Could you tell us just your bite-sized pitch that you're still refining, because it's day 3. What is this book about?
Okay, so the Threads of Power series is set 7 years after the Shades of Magic series, and these are both set in the same world. This is a world where essentially 4 worlds nested side by side like pages in a book, each one with a different relationship to magic. There's our world, which has forgotten magic. There's the Red London world, the next one over, which worships magic, the White London world, where magic is enslaved, and the Black London world, where magic became so powerful that it consumed everyone and everything and destroyed a world. And so this is set, as I said, 7 years after the end of Conjuring of Light, where obviously the events of that book have informed, the events of Conjuring of Light have informed where we start with threads, but it primarily begins to follow a 15-year-old runaway named Tess. You do not know what she is running away from or who, but she has opened up a repair shop in London, in Red London, the one that's full of magic, and she essentially is a tinkerer. She likes to take broken things and fix them. She likes to take unbroken things and make them better, because Tess has the rare ability to not only see the threads of magic that compose the world, but to touch them, to change the very nature of reality. And just as in A Darker Shade of Magic, Kel Maresh came into possession of something he absolutely should not have, and instead of promptly getting rid of it, got his pocket picked by Delilah Bard. In the beginning of Threads of Power, Tess comes into possession of an object because it's brought to her repair shop. And her rule is usually that in order to repair an object, she has to know what it is. But an object comes to her in complete disarray, and she has to put it back together without knowing what it's going to be. And everything goes terribly wrong.
That is one of my favorite scenes. Like I was reading the book and I was really into it because we have another Antari that we'll talk about in a second that I was really into, and I was like, who's gonna be my favorite character? I love books with multiple POVs because it's always like this tug on my heart. Like, who am I gonna root the most for? But then I got to that scene with Tess in the shop. She's so clever. She's just incredibly clever and unassuming, and just the way that you paint, just the way that this world is built, which we will get into. I have many questions about your world building, but I absolutely love that scene. It was so delicious.
Thank you. And to your point, so the other new main character's name is Kosika, and she's an Antari. And so Antari magicians are essentially the one magician in this world, in these worlds, that can make doors between the worlds, that can move freely. They're the most powerful magicians in the world. And we've got Kel and Lila and Holland, who are our original 3 Antari, and now we have Kosika. And Kosika is a 14-year-old queen of White London, who has been queen since she was 7, has been queen since the day after the end of A Conjuring of Light. And I love it because we both have written YA, and I have somehow, this is an adult fantasy series, and somehow the 2 new leads are both teenage girls. And I love it because often when we write YA and we talk about YA, we're talking about a still moment almost in a teenager's life, like a very key crux moment. But one of the things that I love to write about is how our past makes us who we are. And with these 2 teenage girls, I make them the 2 most powerful people in the world, in worlds, in vastly different positions related to society, one a runaway and one a queen. But we get to see how they're going to become the women that they're going to be because we start them as the children that they are.
I love that about adult fantasy. I think there's a lot more range that you can go through. In fact, one of my questions was about that. There seems to also be sort of this conversation with the construct of power. And you seem to have something to say on the topic. Like, I literally wrote down in my questions, we have a runaway. You know, the fact that they are, no spoilers, but they have power, a lot of power. I was curious to know why you thought it was important, or what you're trying to explore with this theme of power.
Well, especially with power as it relates to like femme presenting figures is that like traditionally when we give women power in narratives, they're expected to also be selfless. And this is something that I loved about writing Lila Bard, which is that like I believe in ambition. I believe, especially for teenage girls, that like when I was a teenage girl, I would have burned the world down to be happy. I just don't buy the selflessness of it. I don't buy the idea that what are we teaching girls when we tell them in stories that if they have power, they must also be willing to self-destruct for a greater good? Like, what happened to holding power? What happened to like using power? And neither one of these girls is using power in the wrong way, but because they are the most totemic figures of it, the people around them are trying to use their power to their own ends, and they're resisting. This happens, and again, like I say, I'm not going to spoil anything, and if I say something, know that I don't consider it a spoiler. I consider it a very small moment. There's a moment early on in Kosaka's rule where she finds out that essentially she's on the throne as a puppet. They've put a child on the throne because she's an Antari, and they think that will keep the throne stable. But there's a council called the Vir, which are like 13, mostly dudes, who are just treating her like a child puppet. And when she's about, I think it's like 11, she decides she doesn't want to be a puppet anymore. And she takes control of it. And like that's the thing they don't expect, where she's like, okay, but if I'm queen, then I get to be queen. I'm not just a puppet ruler for you. I'm the most powerful figure in this world. Like, you should probably bow down to me. It's very dangerous when you take a 7-year-old girl and then you let her become a 14-year-old queen, because by then she's going to be like, Like, we meet Kosaka as she's holding a citywide blood ritual where she's making every single citizen of White London bleed to restore the power of their world. And she starts out dressed in all white because she knows by the end of the day it will be all red.
Kosaka they underestimate her.
She's my goth dream. Like, she is like Daria and that like Emily the Strange, like all of it just rolled into one.
She is my favorite. When I saw the complicated dynamics between Kosaka and her mother, I was like, count me in.
Exactly.
I was like, oh, I don't like this mother lady, no spoilers, but I was just like, yeah, no.
But it's all about power, isn't it? I mean, the entire first trilogy is about power. And like one of the examinations in these books is about like who gets power. Because some people believe it's arbitrary, some people believe it's God-given, but not with God, like with magic with a capital M, which is a deetic figure. The version of God in Red London believes that it's chosen. It's not bloodline, it's not lineage. It's not something you can pass down. And so that itself becomes something that's abused. Like the inheritor is a device which introduced in Shades of Magic that was quickly outlawed because people used it to steal magic from other people. It was supposed to be something where you could, toward the end of your life, give your magic to it, and your successor could then absorb that magic. And of course, it didn't require consent. So it was immediately abused as a system. But this is a big question because now we have Rai Maresh as the king of Red London, and Rai has no magic. And there's a rebellion brewing in Red London. And the rebellion, we don't know if they actually believe this argument or if it's a very convenient argument, but the rebellion is saying, hey, we have to take Rai Maresh off the throne because magic is dying. And it's dying because we put a person without magic on the throne. And you're like, it doesn't matter if you believe it or if it's convenient. Like, it's all for power. It's just a different kind of power grab.
I love the way it brings out, again, no spoilers, even in the earlier series, this idea of like, what does desperation for power breed? And a lot of times when we examine power in narratives, we look at the powerful, but what I love is when you get that perspective of the people who don't have power and how the backlash against the group of people that do have power.
Oh yeah, and I mean, all of the characters that I'm writing about in some way or another do have power. Like the main characters of these books have power. So it's about like whether or not they deserve it, and it's about what they do with it. And so the thesis, the thing I want to plant as a seed in your mind as you read Threads of Power, my goal for this series, my warning for you, don't assume that you know who will become a hero and who will become a villain over the course of the series. Because that's the thing. Everyone you meet is not going to end up in the position that you would assume they will. And I just never trust it. I will say, we're 3 days in. I've invited anyone who has read Threads of Power to come up to me and make this guess, and so far nobody has guessed who one of the villains is. Like, they've guessed the obvious ones, but there's a villain that I'm waiting for people to guess, and nobody has guessed this villain.
Challenge accepted.
Exactly. And there's a clue for it, too. It's a hard one, but it's a clue. But yeah, so one of my favorite things to play with in these threads, because this trilogy is structured a little differently in terms of the main characters as they're added to the narrative, but it is that, like, you don't know. Like, it's not going to be clear-cut who's going to become a good guy and a bad guy, so to speak. I mean, and that was really inspired by Holland in the first series. We have a figure who starts out as a villain, progresses to an adversary, and in the end is considered one of the heroes. And I wanted to play with that, going in multiple directions. And so people are going to justify a lot of things in these books.
And that's what makes them so fun to read. I almost, like, that's what we live for. That's why we're turning the page, because we know you're a plot master and a world-building master, which I have so many questions about. You actually touched on something that I was going to ask. We have a lot of well-loved favorite characters, but then we have new characters. Was it like, how do you balance that?
Hard. It's so hard because it's not fair to the new characters, right? The fact is, like, I know that they're going in with a handicap. Like, they're going in, and you've had 3 books for a lot of readers to fall for the cast that I've built. That's 3 books. It's about 1,000 pages of advantage. And I will say so I had a lot of fear about it, and I try to turn that fear into a motivation, because that's just how I am. So I will say, like, as I sat down, it was like coming home. Working on Fragile Threads of Power, it was like coming home. I got to see Kell and Lila again. I was, like, overjoyed. I got to step back into this world I loved. And then it came time to write the new characters. And I thought, oh, shit. Like, I went in and I assumed nobody's going to like them. I went and I assumed that they're going to be the characters, if I don't do anything about it, they're going to be the characters that you get annoyed with when you have, like, a Game of Thrones style tome, like, and you're like, I don't want this perspective.
Nobody wants to read Bran's perspective.
Like, exactly. So my goal then, it became a challenge. How can I make you like them? I had to work 3 times as hard at it. And of course, like, you're not going to feel for them in one book necessarily what you feel for Kell and Lila, but my hope is that by the end of the trilogy, they've earned their place. Yeah. You're at least curious about them.
I am Team Kriska all day. All day.
And it's hard, though. It's hard because, like, and I will say another thing. I am a resentful reader. I hold a lot of things against books as a reader, and so because I'm writing for myself, those are the things I keep in mind. So for instance, I don't like it when an author promises me you're going to see a character and it's a 1-page cameo. Like, you should know that Kell, Lila, Raya, and Alucard compose roughly 50 to 55% of the book. Like, yeah, you get your old characters, you get them. And that's probably, I will say, probably the most that they will take up in a book in this trilogy. See this as me, like, gently passing a torch. They're going to be important to the whole trilogy. This trilogy is not without them. It's just like, I thought they might be maybe 20% of the book, and then by the time I finished writing it, I was like, uh-oh. They just took up like a solid 50% of it.
We have no issues with this.
This is why the book is very stealthy, because it looks like a normal-sized book, and that is an absolute lie. This book is like 670 pages long. Huge. I don't know how they like, it's like a TARDIS. Like, it's just bigger on the inside. But yeah, they take up, like, the old characters take up quite a lot. But my goal is really for them to feel like the first generation is helping pass the torch of narrative a little bit, just because the original generation of characters is moving into a different stage of their lives.
They are, and I think it's interesting how you weave that together. One of the things I love about your books, particularly this series, is that you have all of these characters. I'm a big George R. Martin fan, and he also does this so well. It's like you have this vast world, this very developed magic. It's so incredibly immersive and believable, and you have all of these sort of characters that seem like they're living their lives separately, and then they are all intertwined and woven together, and it's like purposefully done. So you either can see the future and write backwards, or you have secret gnomes in a workshop who help you. How do you do that?
I write backwards.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I was joking.
No. I don't write the whole thing backwards, but I don't start writing the book until I know the endings of everything.
Everything makes sense now.
And then I'm a monster, and I plot religiously. And it's gotten a lot worse, or it's gotten a lot more excessive over the course of my career. I used to just give myself an outline. I don't actually start writing the book now until I have every single scene of the book outlined.
Oh, wow.
Beat for beat. And part of it is because there's a lot of
Yes.
there's like 12 perspectives
Yeah,
in
it's a
this
lot.
book, and there's 4 Londons. Like, and one of the reasons like I don't expand it and spend all my time in like various parts of the world is like I have to have some anchor. Like, it would just spiral out of my control so quickly if I was like, and no, we go to North America. And I'm like, I can't do that. The story is over here. Like, I'm trying to stay tethered to the characters at all times. But no, I plot backwards. So I know the end. I don't ever know the end of the second book in the trilogy because it moves. Like in A Gathering of Shadows, the original ending was a lot meaner. It like we got about 3 chapters further, and we got to like this rooftop scene with Oseron. And in the original version of A Gathering of Shadows, I just slaughtered everybody. Oh. I killed like 95% of the cast.
Oh my gosh!
And I was getting a graduate degree at that time, and I was really underslept. And my editor called me, and she's like, "Hey, I love you. I'm gonna need you to just like take 72 hours, just take a nap, and then delete the last 10,000 words." I'm like, oh my gosh, we can't just be killing everybody. And so then I just killed them all in book 3 instead. No, they're alive. But so I don't always know the second book in a trilogy. It moves. That ending moves as it needs to.
I'm learning this.
It's a little wiggly, but it's like a little loose tooth. But the end of the trilogy, I know where I want to end something. Mm-hmm. So I know how this trilogy ends for almost everyone. I don't necessarily know how it ends for everyone, but I knew the ending for Fragile Threads, and then I worked back.
That is so, I actually said that as a joke. That's how.
It's not a joke.
That's how you do it. That's incredible.
I just terrorize myself.
That is,
yeah.
No, it's masterful.
It's neuroses inducing. It truly is.
Genius.
Yeah, sure.
These are all synonyms.
Sure, yeah, exactly. Good day, bad day.
Okay, so would you say there's anything, so for people who haven't read, or for people who haven't read Darker Shade in a while, is there anything that you would say that they need to know going into Threads? Or need to remember?
I worked really hard to like stealthily put the recaps in.
Yes.
I think here's something to remember, and I'm gonna say this in a way that doesn't spoil, because I know there have been people in the tour stops who like are maybe in the midst of reading Shades of Magic and haven't caught up yet or haven't done a reread. There is a thing that happens to Kell at the end of A Conjuring of Light. Everyone pays attention to what happens to Lila and Holland and Ryan Alucard, but there's a thing that happens to Kell that a lot of people seem to forget. And it's brought up, it's obviously like, I recap the whole thing, but like go in keeping in mind that something has happened to Kell's magic at the end of Shades of Magic. And that is like, a really big, important part of his narrative arc in this book is the repercussion of what has happened there.
Yes.
Other than that, no, like you should be able to go in. Like you should be able, I wish we had a previously on. Like I sometimes wish that all books in a series just came with a quick previously on,
yes.
On the last episode of da-da-da-da. But no, I think it should make itself understandable.
Okay, well, I haven't read Darker Shade in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I literally sucked right in. There were a few things that I was fuzzy on, but the recaps worked really well for me.
Stealthy little recaps, like the broccoli and the mac and cheese just buried in there for you.
Or spinach and mac and cheese.
Yeah.
I do that. Did you always know that you would revisit this world? I was so curious about that.
I really didn't want to, because
and hearts shatter all over the theater.
I really didn't want to because I was so proud of Conjuring of Light. And then I totally understood when we first announced that I was going to do a sequel trilogy that some big fans were nervous because they were like, but Conjuring of Light. And I got halfway through writing Conjuring of Light when I realized I had a plot point that I could have resolved it, but it would have been, what a waste. I had this moment where Maris, who's the captain of a floating market, does a deal with Delilah Bard, in exchange for a favor, to be called in at a later date. Yes. And I didn't want to call the favor in. I just realized I was halfway through when this moment happens, and I was like, it would be rushed. And there's a lot of other plot happening in Conjuring of Light, and I was like, that's a small enough plot point that I'm going to leave it as a cracked door. Because that means if I wanted to write a short story, that's what I thought it was going to be, like just a quick little short story about the favor. And by the time I got to the end of Conjuring of Light, I was like, oh no. Because I had this idea. And basically kind of that's the premise of Fragile Threads, right? I told you that there's an object that comes to Tess's shop to be fixed. The other part of this is that object was stolen from Maris's ship. And Maris needs it. or she just doesn't want it out in the world because it's very dangerous. And she calls Lila. And she's like, get it back.
Because who else would you call?
Yeah, you're like, Lila, fetch. And Lila is not amused by that at all, right? But she owes a favor. And that, I had that. By the time I finished Conjuring of Light, I had that. I was like, that
That's
right
a
there.
good nugget.
But here's what I'll say is, like, to anyone who was concerned or was thinking about it, like, Conjuring of Light has a happy ending, a hopeful ending. It's not happy for everybody, but it's a hopeful ending. That's not how life works. Like, as long as we keep living, our story keeps being written. So that happy ending, that hopeful ending that I gave to the characters at the end of Conjuring of Light, what happens in this book does not undo it. It's 7 years later, and like, they have continued to live, and we have happy seasons and we have hard seasons. And so I gave them the end of a happy season, or a hopeful season. And now they've lived 7 more years. Like, the fact is, we get this oscillation. It is part of existence. As long as we are still alive, we are going to continue to have happy endings and sad endings. We're going to continue to have eras in our life and chapters in our life. This is the next chapter. It doesn't undo any of the joy or the hope or the satisfaction at the end of Conjuring of Light. I'm not prying Conjuring of Light apart. I'm making the next arc. Nobody ever gets to have a happy ending, period, finale until they're dead. Truly, like, once a character dies, once a person dies, and we're not writing them anymore, that's the only time the story stops. And I've really prided myself, something I've worked so hard on in all my books, whether it's Vicious or Addie, LaRue or Shades of Magic, and this, is making you believe that I'm not writing characters, I'm writing people. Mm-hmm. And the difference is that characters aren't real, and people are. And I want you to believe that these people continue to live, continue to grow and change after you are not invited to read it anymore. It's not that their story stops, it's just that you don't get to see what happens next. And so I really wanted this to feel like 7 real years had passed for everyone in this world. And so in that way, it's not meant to undo anything from Shades of Magic. It's just like, and we go on. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I feel like it's incredible. So I felt when the Darker Shade series, and it was like, this is complete.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, Fragile. Hello, pretty.
Temptress.
And I mean, you just open it back up, and it's like, let's do it again. Like,
yeah.
It's just, I don't know, it's nostalgic and sweet, and I love it. I'm excited about the next 2. I'm excited that we get more. One of my questions was,
yes.
Was it going to be a duology or a trilogy? So we're getting a full 3.
Yes. I don't know why I do this myself, because second books and trilogies are so damn hard. This one is going to be, the next one's a little tricky, because this trilogy, if I pull it off, everything should just be caveated with, I'm still writing the next book, and so therefore haven't pulled it off yet, is that each book in the trilogy will not just be a conventional trilogy where we're like, we're all here, and then we all move here, and then we all move here. Much like the series title of Threads, like, there are multiple storylines and characters. In each book in the trilogy, there is a new 1 to 2 protagonists. So in this one, we had Tess and Kosika. But the next set, you have met already. You just don't know who it is. So minor characters become major characters, and it's all going to hopefully weave together. But the next book plays a lot with what I've been calling my Red London Count of Monte Cristo. Okay. There's like a subplot that is a Count of Monte Cristo plot happening in Red London with parts of this cast. So it's all going to, hopefully, the 3 will amalgamate into a finale, but it's not just going to be like a clear A, B, C.
I love that. I'm very excited. So yes,
hopefully I can do it
yesterday. Okay, so switching gears a little bit,
yes.
One of the things that I loved about your book, so romance is one of my favorite things in a book. Romance gets a lot of love in the reading world. But one of the things I love about your books, or just adult books in general, is when they explore other relationships very deeply. Not surface level, but deeply. And you have other relationships. Like, so I just think about Kosika and Kosika's mom. I mean, no spoilers, but when you first meet this woman, you're just like, okay, she can die.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Absolutely.
And then it's a child's mom. I feel so bad.
No, she's a monster.
She is terrible. But then I also think about the king, like King Rai, and like his brother, and like really exploring their brotherhood, and like, you know, they have a history. And so I was curious why that was important to give space to.
Honestly, it's to your point. It's exactly why I don't tend to write really romance-heavy books. They're, like, Kel and Lila are great, and I love writing them. They've earned their romance. They did not start out this way. Started out very adversarial. I wouldn't say full enemies to lovers, but like adversaries to like grudging affection. But it's because of that. It's because there are so many interesting relationship dynamics to be written about, and I so often feel like the introduction of romance becomes the supremacy of romance. The existence of romance in a book for some reason gets upgraded in importance, and every other dynamic gets downgraded, and I just don't enjoy it. And so I tend to overemphasize other kinds of relationship. My favorite relationship in both Shades of Magic and Threads of Power is Kel and Rye. There's a brother dynamic here that involves, early on in the Shades of Magic series, a bond, a soul bond, where Kel is the thing keeping Rye alive. And the level of guilt and complexity that goes into that, and self-loathing that Rye feels about this, and the trauma bonding between the two of them is great. Second only to Kel's hatred of Alucard, which is Rye's partner. And I love this dynamic. In fact, like, one of my favorite things about writing Tess, about writing our new lead, is like, Alucard has the ability to see the threads of magic. Tess has the ability to see the threads and control them. And as soon as I came up with that, my very first thought was, oh my God, Kel is gonna have a field day harassing Alucard about the fact there's something he can't do. Like, I was like, Kel is gonna just be delighted. And like, those are the dynamics that bring me joy. Like, Kosika has essentially like two best friends, and she might love both of them. Like, she might love Nasi, and she definitely loves Lars. Like, I just am interested in messy. I want it
so
messy.
Human. That's so real. You want them to feel like people, and I think that sort of depth to relationships is what makes them feel so vivid, at least to me as the reader on the page.
Thank you. I work really hard on it. And like, romance is great, but romance, I just feel like it's a reward. I think maybe because I write stories that have really high stakes for like the world and like the universe, that I feel like romance is the thing you get when you survive the rest of it, right? Like,
first, don't die.
I never really buy the dynamic where it's like, oh no, the world's ending, we should probably screw. I'm like, the world's ending. Is there nothing else you want to do right now? Like, I don't know. So I like it that, like, I feel like romance happens in the aftermath.
We would also like that story, maybe.
The world's ending. I feel like Lila would just be like, oh no, Kel, the world's ending. And he's like, no, it's not. And she's like, it could be.
I love that. Okay, so can we talk craft for a few minutes before they cut me off here? Be thinking of questions, because we are going to toss to the audience for questions for quite a while. So, okay. So I am very curious about your story development process. I remember watching your stories with Addie, which I think was a process in itself.
It was.
I'm curious how this book was particularly different.
Well, it was the same in that I use I outline every scene. What's really tricky and what I'm learning to do is that there's the difference between narrative order and chronological order. Chronological order is the story, the order in which a story actually happens, and then narrative order is the order in which we tell it. So for Addie, it was really clear cut because there are two stories happening, one over 300 years and one over 1 year. And I learned that I enjoyed writing them both chronologically and then weaving them. And I was surprised to find with Fragile Threads that I could play that same game no matter the number of points of view. In fact, the more points of view I had, the more essential it was to write the story chronologically and then figure out how to make the puzzle work narratively. I think it helps me maintain voice. Obviously, it becomes more complicated. I have my hard, fast rules, and this drives my editor crazy. She's like, could we just break it? And I'm like, absolutely not. I believe you can either change perspective or change timeline. I do not believe you should do both at the same time. I think it is too disorienting to change point of view and change time. Mm-hmm. So you'll notice I will frame stories where we will go from Tess in the present to Tess in the past to somebody in the present to somebody in the past. Or Tess in the present, Tess in the past, Tess in the present, and then change Kel in the present, Kel in the past. I just think I want to make it organic, and I want to make it so it's not difficult to follow. I know I'm playing with a lot of threads, and they're going to convene at roughly the 2/3 mark, which you either love or hate. You're like, wow, the first third is really slow. And I'm like, it's because we're making a game. Yes. And we have to set the board before we and learn the rules before somebody wins the game. And that's how you care about the game. And so I have learned, though, that I really need to write each perspective in its entirety, even though readers will almost never read it that way. The difference is just that, something with Fragile Threads is really, really complicated. There's an early version of this book, or there was not even early, a version of this book where you don't have Kosaka. Because it's a big lift. For most of this book, Red London and White London, their storylines are happening without touching. And so, and the book is 670 pages, and there was a conversation of, do we save Kosaka for book 2? And I was like, no. Mostly because I just really liked writing her, and I was like, it's fine, it's all going to convene. But, you end up having to make really hard decisions from a storytelling perspective when you're holding so much story. And it's not even just editing it out. It's what do we use now and what do we use later?
Yeah.
It's daunting. The problem is, and I'm not sure you agree with this. I want to know if you agree with this. It's a fallacy that there's a right and wrong way to tell a story. The problem is we're not choosing between the right and the wrong way. We're choosing between 19 options, and it's hard to know qualitatively which is the right way.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm writing a book 2 in a trilogy currently, so I'm pulling my hair out. But no, literally, it's there are 5 different ways to do this. There is no objective right. No. You have to pick one.
Yeah.
And you're
and then you live with it.
Yes.
And then the next day, you're I'm going to undo it. I got to work for an hour and a half today. I went to a coffee shop for an hour and a half today because I have to write while on tour. I have a deadline. And I spent an hour and 28 minutes of that hour and a half working on a scene. And in the last 2 minutes, I was no. I did it wrong. No. I did it wrong. And it's you know when it's wrong, but you don't know when it's right.
100%.
And that's very hard the bigger the story gets. So the bigger the world, the bigger the story, the more doubt you have about whether you are choosing the right choose your own adventure for every single decision possible.
Literally.
So propagate that out over 500 choices in the book, and you're I don't know. You don't know. In a standalone, this is the beauty of a standalone that I love. It's contained. And so yes, you're still choosing between options, but you know the beginning, middle, and it, you know the vague shape of it. A series is unwieldy.
Oh my gosh. Why did I choose this?
I don't know. I was supposed to be an astrophysicist. I have chosen wrong. Because at least in maths and sciences, there's some right answers too. In storytelling, there are no right answers. They're just what I choose to do.
Well, we're really enjoying your choices.
Oh, so. Thank you. I hope so. It's hard. It's so hard. And the stories get bigger because you want to get better. And so you challenge yourself more, and in those challenges comes more decisions. And again, it's not a riddle that you can solve. You want it to be a riddle. You want to stare at the story and be it's a riddle and I'm going to solve it. And it's haha, you solved one scene and you're not actually sure you solved it, but you got from here to here, and now we have to keep going and find another way through the next part.
I feel so seen right now.
It's not a video game. Don't you just wish there was a concrete series of bosses that you had to beat and then you win? It doesn't work that way.
You get the little princess, what's the princess name in the castle?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I don't know. I don't play video games. I really wish I did. The only reason I don't play video games is because I have such an addictive personality that I would never write another book.
Okay, well then you cannot touch
it. It would just be me for 14 hours straight being this is great.
We need you addicted to writing, not video games.
The problem is that I am.
Okay, I am short on time, and I do want to make sure that I ask a few wrapping up questions, including a rapid fire. But I wanted to ask another question about author life, which is sort of not a typical question. A lot of talk about world building and craft, but you exist in 2 countries, multiple countries.
I do.
But what is that like as a writer? Do you write certain books in Europe and write some books here? Do the words flow the same depending on where you're at?
The words do not flow the same. In fact, it used to be when I lived in the States. I live in Scotland. And when I lived in the States, when I lived in Nashville, I would need to change coffee shops for each book. So I would find a coffee shop. I would write an entire book, largely in that coffee shop, and then when the book was done, I could never go back to that coffee shop.
Gosh.
It was dead to me. I was just raise it to the ground. I don't have this problem in Scotland. The beautiful thing about Scotland is the reason that I moved there. One, from a complete practical perspective, it is 5 hours ahead of New York. I can get a whole 5 hours of my day done before New York Publishing wakes up. And my email gets messy. And like, it's beautiful to have, like, we live in an environment which necessitates social media, which necessitates promotion, which necessitates accessibility and availability. It is really nice to know, because I write mostly in the morning, it's really nice to know in the morning that no one's gonna bother me. And I'm not gonna be distracted as much by my social media. Like, it can all wait till the afternoon. That's a gift. It's also just a place where I feel closer to sane. Like, I don't think any place is ever gonna make me feel sane, but like, I write because it's the only, I don't write because I like telling stories, but I don't write because I like writing. I write because it's the only time that the jumble of yarn in my head can be pulled straight. It's the only thing that adds order to a very chaotic thing that is my brain. And when I'm in Scotland, everything's quiet. And that combination of quiet and work, I write 90% of my books in Scotland. I don't do well writing on the road. I'm trying, but I'm only able to do this right now because I'm on like the last third of my next book, and it's all outlined. So like, I have a sight line. I couldn't have started my book on tour. I wish I were in revisions on tour, because at least you can pick at that. But I require kind of like a vacuum for writing, and Scotland gives me my vacuum. So I come out of my little Scottish cave for when it's time to come and see people, but I have to limit it. Like, being on tour right now, people are like, well, why didn't you come to this city? Or why didn't you come to this city? I'm like, I'm but one small human. It's a very large country. And like, of course, we could do this full time, but then when stories get told, and I was telling a friend backstage, like, you don't think about the math of it. Like, the book I'm writing now will come out in 2025. Like, yeah, exactly.
They're thinking, oh my gosh, we have to wait that long.
We have this, like, we're constantly playing, we're always like panicked because we're always behind because we're always writing for like years in the future.
I just had this conversation yesterday because it hit me. I was like, oh, I have to figure that out now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, it's just, and so we do whatever we need to do to try and get work done. I have friends who can write anywhere, and I try to make as few caveats on my writing as possible. I don't need the light to be a certain way. I don't need the tea to be a certain temperature. I just like truly need my headphones and at least 30 minutes where somebody doesn't talk to me. But it would be really great if I had that every single day. And so when I'm at home in Scotland, I am off. Like, I'm online, of course, because everybody here knows that probably, but like, I'm trying to be offline. But like, when I'm at home in Scotland, I do the same thing every single day, and it would be so boring for anyone but me. Like, it's not glamorous, it's not fun, you can't make a fun reel out of it. Like, it's just me sitting quietly in a coffee shop, mumbling to myself, because I sub-vocalize. It's really terrible. I learned that about myself when I sat across from another writer, and she's like, you do know you just talk. And I'm like, this is horrifying. My favorite thing about the pandemic is that I had a mask on and nobody could see that I was talking. But no, I take my dog to my coffee shop, which is at the end of my street, every single day for 2 hours, and those 2 hours are mine.
That's so great. It sounds magical.
It is. It's so magical that writers come and they visit me, and then they're like, I don't want to go home. And I'm like, I know, but you have to. Like, this is my home. Yeah. I don't have to go home.
I love that.
Yeah.
So tell me, I think you're working on book 2, but what are you working on next or now?
Right now, I am working on my next standalone novel. So it's what I'm not been allowed to reveal the full title yet, so I just call it Bones, or Toxic Lesbian Vampires. And it's essentially my inverse Addie. So I had Addie, which is a book about immortality, and it's about stubborn hope and defiant joy. And I have Bones, which is a book about immortality, and it's about hunger and rage and 3 female vampires over 500 years whose lives and deaths are connected. And I am really...
When is this? When do we get this again?
Well, it really depends on when I finish writing it. So I'm finishing...
Are there any good coffee shops?
Yeah, right. So I'm finishing that. We will build a coffee shop. So 2025. So I'm writing that right now, and I'll go straight from drafting that into back to work on Threads 2.
Threads 2.
Yeah.
Okay, let me do my rapid fire, and then I think we're at time. Okay. Black or green tea?
Black tea, not Earl Grey. Just be very clear about that. Earl Grey is not tea. I don't care what you say. The most traumatic day of my life was that somebody gave me what they said was a black iced tea, and it turned out to be a lavender Earl Grey iced tea, and I carried it around out of spite for 6 hours and made every one of my friends taste it because I was so mad. You thought this was rapid fire. I'm so sorry. I had to get context. Last night, Maggie Takuda Hall was like, I'm going to do rapid fire, and you cannot give any context for your answers. And I was like, this is the hardest day of my life.
I want all the context. Okay, spring or fall?
Fall.
I knew you were going to say that. I know the answer to this next one, too. Science fiction or fantasy as a reader?
Ooh. Sure, we'll say fantasy. I read very, very broadly. Like, I read like a poetry collection, a memoir, short fiction, essays. I probably don't read as much fantasy or science fiction as I do any other genre, but I consume like a lot of fantasy media and a lot of genre. Everything has to be a little genre.
Okay, TV or movies?
TV, if I'm at home. Like, I don't want to see movies on the TV. I want to see movies in the theater.
Okay, okay. The book is always better than the movie. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, 99% agree.
Is there one you're thinking
the second
of?
Hunger Games movie is
Okay.
better than the second Hunger Games book. I'm just going to say it. It's better.
You're getting
It's
your tea
better.
hot here, ladies and gentlemen.
But in general, yes, the book is always better than the movie.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this one. Scottish countryside or New York City lights?
Scottish countryside.
I knew that was it. Dragons or fairies?
Neither.
Neither?
I'm sorry, they're not my bag. Okay, but I love Holly Black, so I'll say fairies. Dragons are hard.
We do love Holly. Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
Hardcover or softcover books?
Hardcover to live on my shelf, softcover to actually read.
I like this. And last one, I have to ask, which is your favorite London?
Oh, white.
Really?
Yeah, no one ever, like, everyone thinks I'm gonna say red. I would crush it in White London. Are you kidding me? It's like, I mean, Victor Vale is an autobiographical character. I would be fine in White London. Like, yeah, I like the clarity of White London. Like, the powerful take the throne by force. It makes sense. It doesn't. We don't really deal with like the political machinations. They're like, I'm stronger than you. This is my chair now. I get it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Schwab.
So we're gonna
do questions.
We're gonna open it up to questions.
You mentioned the favor being a door into this series. Did the new characters come with that, or did you find them as you sort of walked through that door?
Ooh, Tess came with the favor because I knew that I needed a pair for Lila, a pair bond moment. Like, Tess needed to be the thing that Lila was going to interact with. And I really like it because Lila doesn't remember, but they've met before, which is the thing that comes up. They didn't meet in Shades of Magic, don't worry, but like they've met. And like Lila made an impression on Tess. And so I wanted this very different. I also really wanted to write a character that was vastly different from Lila. Like Lila, if there's a danger happening, they each have a different form of self-preservation. Lila will just like, she'll cut someone, right? Like she'll just stand and knife them. Tess will burn her tracks and start again. Like they have a very different way. And so I really wanted to write someone. There is a character in Fragile Threads of Power that is my favorite person to put up against Lila. Her name is Bex. She is an assassin. I love them because their fight scenes were my favorite to write. But like with Tess, it really came with that favor, this idea of where that object would end up. Kosika was born out of Holland. I understood Kosika because I understood Holland.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. You mentioned creating the book from the end to the beginning. Do you write your people that way as well? Do you know exactly where your people end up and then you work backwards, or?
Yes. I conceive of them and then I find their end state. So it's like they don't start at the end, but like as soon as I start building their identity, their personality, I go all the way to their finished form, and then I rewind them to figure out where I want to meet them. Because obviously we're going to meet them in an unfinished form. And so like I did that with Lila very early on. I did that with Kel. It's not that like the finished form as in like where they die, like their end state, but their mature form, like who they're going to become. I figure that out. And then I figure out at how far from that point I want to be introduced to them.
I was just wondering, especially across series, how much your characters are inspired by past characters, because I feel like Lila Bard has a lot of Kate Harker in her, but I don't feel like Kel has any of August in him. So I was just wondering, like, how much your past characters inspire you while trying to make completely different worlds.
That's so interesting. They don't inspire each other, but they're all inspired by parts of myself. So a lot of the dynamics will repeat. Like the dynamic between Kate and August is very similar to the dynamic between Kel and Lila, in that like one is extremely earnest and sensitive. I tend to like the boys and the mask presenting characters to be extremely emotive and sensitive, and I tend to like the girls and the femme presenting characters to be more ambitious and cutthroat. And like, I think that's just because that's the dynamic I want to see, and it's often not the dynamic that we see in fantasy. So it's less about how the individual characters exist in a vacuum and more about how they exist in relationship to each other. But no, it's also just that like, there are a few touch points in all of my books. I've written, this is I think 23, and technically, and I like to revisit certain kinds of characters. I'm notoriously like finicky about that. Like for instance, I will give multiple characters in different books the same ability or the same origin story, and then I'll see how they change based on the world that I've built them into. So like Cassidy Blake has the same origin story as Sydney Clark. So Cassidy Blake in the City of Ghosts series has the same origin story as Sydney Clark in Vicious. But because I built them into different worlds, they exist differently. So I like to like plant the same seed and then be like, different garden, what's gonna grow? So a lot of it is just that I like to test the waters of things, but a lot of it is also just that like characters are like tiny fragments of an author's psyche that we then break off and grow a new person from. So I think that's how I relate to my characters, and so I tend to be, like both Kel and August are exploring aspects of anxiety and neuroses. They're very, very neurotic characters. They're overthinkers, if you will. August Flynn in The Savage Song was written really as an examination of like my own relationship with anxiety. He like spirals really easily. He kind of like, his mind gets away from him. So it's less like about them and more about me. Like I'm definitely, like Henry Strauss is purely autobiography. Henry Strauss, I'll like take a part of myself. So for instance, Henry Strauss in The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is who I would have been if I'd never found writing. At 19, I found writing and Henry Strauss didn't. I found my outlet and he didn't. So I'll just take like a point of departure. Do you ever feel like haunted by past versions or like versions of your life you didn't pick? I will often like make a decision at a crossroads in my life and then feel like for the next few years I'm vaguely haunted by the version that I didn't pick. I kind of do that with characters where I make them the version of me that didn't exist.
That's
super weird.
That's fascinating.
It's so narcissistic. It's just like, they're all me.
You get to live many lives.
Yeah. Hi.
So you mentioned that you do outlines for your stories. When you think, do you think in pictures or words? And does that change when you're reading?
Ooh, here's where it gets real weird. I just learned that there are some authors that don't see things in their mind when they write.
Wait, really?
Yeah, like David Levithan doesn't see what he's writing. And I didn't know until he was on a TV set for one of his adaptations and they asked him what something should look like and he's like, why would I know? And I was like, so
oh my gosh.
I'm not trying to put David Levithan on blast, it's great, but like my brain is so polar opposite to that. So the way that I think of my stories, I want to hear your answers too because it's different for every single author. I am playing a movie in my head and then transcribing that film on paper so that the exact same movie plays in your head, down to the color palette and the score and the atmosphere and the position of the camera and the choreography.
The position of the camera.
Yeah, like I need it. I cannot write about a thing I cannot see. And it's very different from saying that I need to have a lived experience to write about something because I write about fantasy a lot and like vampires and stuff like that. But like, if I can't close my eyes and envision the set, I can't write it. How about you?
100% same.
Yeah.
Mine is usually an image at first. Like the image for Marion was a tiara growing out of someone's skull.
Yes.
And it's like so visceral.
Yeah.
But so it starts as an image and then it transforms into a movie and I picture my scenes as movies before I write them,
Yeah.
and then I bring it to life. I hadn't thought about the angle of the camera.
Like
I'm
you
still
do,
there.
it's perspective.
Yes.
Like you're thinking about how and
So
like
brilliant.
how we move. Like the very first time I was ever on a set and they did like the walkthrough with the actors and they were like we're like blocking. I was like, this is what I do, except they're still in my head, and you guys are real people. Yeah, and to your point, I do the image thing as well. A Darker Shade of Magic was the very first thing that ever came to my mind was a still frame in black, white, and red, because it was black and white, but Kel's coat was red, of a young man, Kel, walking through a wall and colliding with a girl dressed as a boy. Like that moment, which becomes like chapter 15 or something, like that was exactly what the still frame was. And with Tess, it is like her and this dead owl. This is the dead owl. It's not a real dead owl. This one's silver. It's not a bone. But like there's a dead owl in the book. It's just basically a red London Furby. Like that's just all you have to think about it is. It's like Tess wanted a friend, and so she like took a skeleton of an owl and like used the threads of magic to animate it so that it reacts to her voice. It's a red London Furby. But I saw her just like doing that, like pulling the threads around it, like almost like sinew.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it's always an image. It's always an image. And I'll sometimes stress test my characters by dropping them into an environment and seeing how they move through it. So I'll be like, here's a tavern, and I'm just gonna drop Lila in, and I will always know what Lila's gonna do. She's gonna start a fight. Like it's a limited amount of time before Lila picks a fight with somebody in the tavern, right? So that kind of thing. But yeah, everything is a film. Every single thing I do has to be a film.
I did not know I thought that's what everyone
No,
did.
some writers don't see, and I love, first of all, I love that they're still writers. Like I love that there are
Yeah.
authors who make me believe that they are seeing this entire thing as a film. And it's just, I'm like, how?
Fascinating.
My mind is, because I truly need to be able to like I will travel to places because I can't see them. I have to some places I can just create out of whole cloth, but some places if I can't visualize it, I have to find photo references, I have to travel. And it's so dumb because it's for like one sentence. I'll be like really pissed because I can't describe a rug. And it's like vital to that scene for some reason because I know it's there and it's gonna be like the one thing that you see. I will use a lot of visual shorthands in that way. The reason that I have Kel's coat, the reason that I have Lila's mask, the reason that I had Alucard's like his eyebrow ring, I am like not good at faces. I'm practically face blind, and so you'll notice like my characters have very little like facial description. I need a visual shorthand. I need something that can like click in for me that I can like, if nothing else, I can picture a dude in a red coat. I can picture his like floppy hair. So it has to be visual for me though.
So a lot of people that create things, or just people in general, they have inspirations. They take inspiration from a lot of people. So my question to you is, how do you feel? Because knowing that a lot of writers now, and even new writers for the years to come, they're going to take inspiration from you, from the books that you've written, the stories that you've told. Like how does that make you feel?
I mean, it's really cool. like this is the thing, right? Every time we make art in any form, it is because of the art that we have consumed up until that point in our life. We are a continually evolving thing. Our minds are just sponges for everything. It's surreal. One, it makes me feel old. So thank you. Like I truly, it does, just because like I'm like, but I'm still a baby. But no, I've been writing for 15 years now. It's the greatest flattery that I think I will ever experience in my life. Beyond readers loving work, there is a particular joy and beauty. We were talking about this backstage, and it made me emotional because like there is a particular beauty in knowing that you have made art that has made other people want to make art. Because that's how I judge good art. When I go to a movie or watch a TV show or listen to a song or read a book that makes me itch to write, I think that's the best thing in the entire world, and it doesn't happen very easily or very often because we've trained our minds to dissect the things that we're experiencing in a way that can often preclude joy. And so when I read a book that makes me forget that I am a writer, that makes me stop picking it apart where I can't find the seams, or when I experience anything of beauty that makes me want to make beauty. Because it's not just good art, it's just something particular. Like that for me was Neil Gaiman very early on in my career, was like wanting to have that, wanting to make that kind of art that made me feel the way his work made me feel. And so I don't think there's any greater flattery than feeling like you've inspired other writers, because like you're being part of the conversation in their head, and you're being part of their creative origin story. I can't think of anything greater in the entire world. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So ever since I read Vicious last year, I've noticed that you really like to write a lot of POVs and then thread them together to create a plot twist.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy readers' surprise a lot when you see like little hints that you laid out?
Yes. I take immense glee in the fabrication. Like I think it's a challenge that I like to set for myself. And it's also a little bit of a creative crutch. Like I'm dealing with this in Bones in my next book now, which is that like my inclination is to take a long storyline and chop it down into itty bitty pieces and then braid it all together. But Bones is like 3 novellas in a trench coat. It's meant for you to like experience it in actual like wholeness. And it's when you're writing, when you get to cut between timelines, it creates a sense of urgency in the narrative, whether or not it exists. Like you can prevent anyone from ever getting bored or getting lulled into a rhythm because you interrupt the rhythm by cutting character or timeline, by moving it. And that's why you get like super short chapters. That's why you get like, everyone's always gonna turn that page a little extra. It's very scary then as a writer to be like, actually, what if I like trust the reader to sit in a perspective and not jump? That's a very scary thing. I might end up chickening out and chopping Bones up into teeny tiny pieces and then stitching it back together. But I don't want to. I want to make it work. But yes, I will say though that with Vicious, which is 3 timelines, 10 years ago now and the 10 years between, and several points of view, it took more than a year to figure out the structure. Like structure is a different beast from plot. And I love the challenge, but I know I also rely on it to create urgency. And I'm like very ornery, so every book I have to do something different. I can never repeat the same structure twice. I just like won't let myself. I'm like, oh, don't get boring. Like, God forbid, consistency. And so, yeah, it's a challenge that I set out, but it's really integral to the planning of the book. So I sit down with that structural challenge in mind already. It's not something that just evolves over the course of writing. Nothing, as moral of my story, nothing evolves naturally over the course of my writing. It is all done with like ridiculous levels of intention. But I really, really love structural braiding. I think when you can pull it off well, it's an incredible feat. And I think what I love about it is also the danger, because it is really, really hard to pull off. And it's much like, I'm sorry guys, I love metaphors, but like, it's much like a photo that risks being just slightly out of focus. Mm-hmm. If you don't quite pull it off, like nothing looks good. Mm-hmm. And so I think I like the risk. I think I like that like there's always that danger that I'm gonna be like a millimeter off in the calculation and it's not gonna work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, so you mentioned that during one of your drafting moments, you had killed off so much of your cast.
Yeah.
But you know, post-nap, you were in a better state of mind.
Yeah.
Were there any moments when writing kind of any of your books, but mainly Shades of Magic and now Threads of Power, that you kind of wished you had been just a little more like dubious, a little devious, you know, and really gotten that reader?
Like killed more people?
Yeah, that
Do I wish I killed more people?
I think that's
like just that's the main part of this question, but just, you know, being dubious in general, because reader shock is a very big thing.
You know, here's the thing. I'm gonna give an answer which is the most honest answer possible. I don't like killing characters because you can't torture them anymore. No, it's, okay, so here's the thing,
That's
right?
fair.
As long as they're alive, they can have both good days and bad days, right? As long as they're alive, you can continue to like mine them for their emotional trauma. And like, once you kill a character, like, it really is such a loss. Not just, of course it's a loss, like it's emotional, but it's a narrative, like it's a creative loss because you've put so much work into building these people. I really like killing minor characters because I like tricking you into caring about them. Like I will tell you that there's a character in Shades of Magic named Hastra. Yeah. He's a young guard. He's assigned to guard Kell. This is as spoilery as it's going to get. I'm sorry, but you all should know by the time, like, you meet Hastur and he's like, Kell, I made you a plant. Anytime a character does something that nice, they're gonna die.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, oh, Hastur, you grew
It's
him a
giving
plant.
Ned Stark
Exactly.
vibes. Like,
Ned Stark
Ned
vibe
Stark
across
vibes,
the board.
gonna die.
So at the moment I introduced Hastur, I was like, yeah. Those are my fun ones. Like, I really like killing minor characters because I actually work as hard on the minor characters as I do on the major characters. I work, like, the standard I hold myself to with minor characters is that you should be able to tell an entire book from their perspective. If you shifted the lens and they were the hero of the story, because they are all the hero of their own story, it should work. So there has to be enough meat on their narrative bones, regardless of if they're there for a single page or longer. They're more fun for me to be dubious with. I'm very averse to killing any of my core cast, just because then I can't make their lives hell. Like, once I kill them, then they're immortalized, and like, that's not as fun. But yeah, I will say I've never pulled back. Like, I've never not killed someone that I planned on killing. I never get cold feet. I've prolonged their life a little bit, but like trust that, like, I'm very capable. The only characters I can't seem to kill are in Vicious, and that's because it's like literally written into it. like I got really, like, at End of Vengeful, a character dies, a main character dies, and everyone was like, and there's a third book coming, Victorious, and like at the end of Vengeful, everyone was like, I can't believe you killed him. And I was like, when has anyone stayed dead? Like, literally, when has anyone in that series stayed dead? Why are you so upset right now? He's on ice. Like, he literally got, like, put into a drawer. You don't think someone's gonna
Like,
open?
have faith.
Yeah, you don't think someone's gonna open the drawer again? Like, what is this? So usually, like, I often worry I'm not dubious enough or mean enough. I was working on that with Bones with my next book, and then I was like, oh no, what if it's not sad enough? What if it doesn't hurt enough, as I think the way I thought of it? And then I like got like a couple chapters further, and I was like, oh no, it's okay.
Hi there.
Hi.
Several of your stories have been optioned,
Yes.
and we've gotten to see the fruits of some of that labor with First Kill. So my question is, what are your favorite and alternatively most challenging parts about adaptation from script to set?
Yes. Here's the thing. So Shades of Magic in development as a film, and I've written the script, and that was exciting because I did not originally write the script, but finally they were like, okay, fine, we trust that you might actually know what happens in this story. I will say, the hardest part is that when we write books, we are the god. It is not by committee. Like, we have editors, we have teams that are there to help us make our work the best it can be, but at the end of the day, we are the gods of the world that we make, and if it's our name on the cover and we decide what's in the book. When you are in adaptation, it is a pantheon. And you are the smallest god in that pantheon. It is like 300 people, and the money gets to decide. And I'm not ponying up $100 million, so I am not the deciding factor. And the hardest thing about it is that you're not in control. You will never, ever, ever, ever be the most powerful person in the room when it comes to adaptation. And that is hard because some of the best content out there gets made by having a unification of voice and identity, like the one person writing, directing thing. Like, the smaller the project, the better it usually is. And it's because the less monetary risk there is, the less people are exposed, the more art gets to be authentic. It's really, really hard for blockbusters to be good. Now, the scary part about this is that for a darker shade of magic to get made, it has to be a blockbuster. There's no indie version. Like Addie LaRue, which I haven't read the latest version of the script yet, but is very good, it can get made at a price that I think will allow it to be great. A darker shade of magic has a much taller mountain to climb because the number of people who will have to spend a huge amount of money to get it made will have to be satisfied. And that is really hard because, like, satisfaction is kind of the enemy of great, you know? pleasing everybody is very hard to make something good. So that's the fear. The beauty is that for all of the work that we do as writers, the fact that actors can take a character that you invented and make them feel real. Like, I will do everything I can to make a character feel like a person. An actor will convince you it's a person. There is the first day that I saw on First Kill, like, actors breathe life into characters I made up on a Tuesday. I was like, I made you up, and now you're standing in front of me, and there's like a fictional poster on the wall with you on it. Like, it doesn't compute in my mind. It's ridiculous. That's so cool. So like, there's a lot of amazing things about it, but the reason that I will never stop writing novels is that I want to control the story I'm telling. That movie playing in my head, I want it to play in your head the way it plays in my head. And that's the only way I'm ever going to have concrete vision. Now, the only other thing I would add to that is, like, we have to get around the language of, I hope they don't ruin X. Because no matter what happens, they're not replacing the book. It's a different medium, it's a different art form, it's a different journey. No one has ever been like, now burn all the copies of A Darker Shade of Magic so that nobody will ever see the version of the story. The best content is different. Like, Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's also one of my favorite books. They are different. Same for The Princess Bride. Like, these are my favorite things. So I think it has to be able to exist differently, and only time I get frustrated is when readers are like, I hope they don't ruin it. I'm like, I still wrote it. Like, it's still there. Like, look, it's up there. Like, so there's a lot of blessings and a lot of curses. And the only thing I can say is that I am so closely involved with all of the things. I did not used to be, but like now, like I'm as involved as I can possibly be with my work. And I have proxies in my producers and my directors and my studios who are as passionate and as protective of the work as I am. That's all you can really ask for. You try and get into business with the people that you believe in as much as they believe in you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So long-winded an answer, I am so sorry. It is a messy answer.
Okay, so when you were developing Shades of Magic and Threads of Power, did you have a character, like when you first outlined it, who you knew was going to be the main POV? Or were you just skipping back and forth between them? It
expands. So like in book 1, I would say it's like really Kel and Lila's show. And then, like, we don't meet Alucard Emery until book 2. And then Alucard's like, it's the me show, because that's Alucard's vibe. And so, like, what I try and do is I pick 2 to 4 characters who are really our scaffolding for each book. And then it can expand over the course of the series. But for, like, the first book in a series, whether it's A Darker Shade of Magic or Threads of Power, I'm trying to keep, like, a nexus. I'm trying to keep a core. And that's really just like for stability's sake of the story. I don't want to value all the characters' points of views equally. Like I want to expand them, and so I will pick like a core 3 to 4 that have by far the most scenes. And then I will pick like the next tier of characters has fewer scenes and fewer scenes and fewer scenes. Because I need to create a sense of hierarchy in the narrative, or it just becomes a little chaotic. It's like a very, again, like that 1 millimeter off focus danger. Like it's very precarious at all times. And I'm trying to make sure that you like have enough time with the characters to care about them. But I also think that it's really, really fun when you meet a character for like a moment in one book and then they like start sneaking into the story in more detail. Like Ned Tuttle in A Darker Shade of Magic was supposed to exist for 1 paragraph. And somehow he's like really important now. Like he just like, nobody kicked him out when the bar closed. Like he just like, he snuck in and stayed. So those are my favorites. I actually love having characters that I know I only get to spend a page or 2 with. There's a character in Fragile Threads of Power who you can probably tell is one of my favorite because they have a special coat. And like, that's just my demarker. It's a new character. Their coat's falling apart. And I only get to stay with them for 2 scenes in this book, and I was like, I'm gonna come back to you, don't worry. So I usually know who I'm gonna play with later, and I will like just put a pin in them for now.
Why did you choose to have Kel originate from Red London as opposed to the other Londons?
Great question. Because basically, like, we have 3 Antari, and each one is from a different London. I wanted Lila to be our London because she is our portal. She's us. Like, in these books, you have insiders and outsiders, and the thing about it is that, like, Kel is not gonna notice the same things about Red London as Lila is, and he's gonna notice different things about Grey London than Lila is, and vice versa. And so, like, when I'm writing, even though these books are written in 3rd person, so, like, from a slight distance, I'm connected to their eyes. I'm looking at, like, when I'm deciding what point of view a scene is gonna be in, it's, like, almost always gonna be from the outsider in the moment if I need you as the reader to learn something new. So I loved having Kel come from a world where, like, he's not our portal character. This is his normal. And Lila then gets to become the portal character who guides us in. So everything is brand new for Lila at the same time it's brand new. Oops, sorry. At the same time, I forgot that was there. At the same time that it's brand new for us. And so, like, it was very much a decision because Kel feels like an outsider in a world that he is from. Lila is an insider in any world that she goes to. Like, she makes herself an insider. And that difference is really, really important. And that's probably, going back to an earlier question, the dynamic that I really like to play with, who feels like an outsider at home and who feels like an insider anywhere. But when they're moving, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, like, we notice very different things when we see them every day than when we've never seen them before. So I look a lot when I'm building a story at, like, who is gonna be our guide? And I wanted Lila to be the guide.
Hi.
Hi.
When reading Shades of Magic for the first time this year, so many things stood out to me. One of the big things was Kel and his relationship to Rai. As someone with a twin brother, I was like, ha, finally, one of them is not evil this time.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciated that, especially Kel's relationship with Alucard.
Yes.
And so my question is, if you didn't know that Alucard is Dracula backwards, where did the name come from?
Okay, so here's what you have to understand. Alucard is Dracula backwards. I know it now.
You didn't know?
No, I didn't know. And what makes it so much worse is I took the name from, like, from a vampire show.
Oh my gosh.
I think it was Vampire Hunter D. I, like, know that it came up in, like, an anime that I liked a lot, and, like, I still didn't know. And I just really like the name. And the problem with names and me is that, like, it's the one part I'm really wishy-washy about, in that, like, I'm really organized and structured and everything else, but with names, it's feel. Like, I didn't have a name for the first 2 weeks of my life because my parents wanted to live with me. They were like, how can we name somebody we don't know? And so, like, I was like baby Schwab. And then, like, they went back and, like, corrected it. Like, they had a few names they were trying to decide between. And, like, I am such a Victoria. Like, I'm so glad they waited, but I kind of do the same thing with characters where, like, I have to live with them and I have to feel them out. And then once I have the name, it can't change. So even if you had told me, like, in enough time before Gathering of Shadows came out, like, hey, just so you know, that is Dracula backwards, I couldn't have changed it at that point because I'd written him. And, like, this is the thing, like, I was actually a month late starting to write Fragile Threads of Power because I didn't have Tess's name. I had, like, 7 names, and I would just, like, play with them. I would, like, they have to taste a specific way. I have to, like, roll them off my tongue. I have to taste them in different scenes and in different settings. Like, names are so important, whether it's a name we choose for ourselves or the one that we're born with. Like, names have so much power in a story, and especially in my books. And so I just, like, need names to feel right, and he always was an Alucard. So I will live with it for the rest of my days. I accept the abuse that I take for that name, but he's always been Alucard. What really got messy is that at one point, Rai uses the nickname Luke, and I used it exactly one time, and then I went on and named the devil in Addie, LaRue Luke, and my editor was like, Jesus Christ. But I was like, it's just a nickname. The little princess in Fragile Threads of Power, there's a little princess, and she calls Alucard Luca. Which is the Arnesian word for favorite. So it, like, has a little dual meaning. But yeah, names are really important. They're so important. And I wish that I could be like more methodical about it too. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I wrote this down so I won't forget. Okay. So years ago, I remember that you tweeted something about from Halsey's song about villains that live in your head, and you want to write them before, like you related to that. And I just want to know, do you constantly come up with characters, come up with worlds? And if you do, like, do you start with the world itself and what character you would choose to go with, or do you choose the character and then come up with a world? Like, how does that come to be? And like, the languages that you create, do you consult someone to choose the languages, to create a language? Like, how does that come to be?
I'll start with the language part because it's the easiest. Languages are written from the ground up in my books, and I write them the way that you would write any language, and that I figure out the grammatical structure, and then I build the vocabulary as I need it. So it's a continuously evolving thing. My favorite thing is that early on, when I was just starting it, I made a couple of mistakes. Like, I would use multiple words for the same thing, or one word to mean multiple things, and then I was like, ha, that's how language works, though. If you think about it, we have synonyms. We have some words that mean multiple things. So there were a couple like learning curves early on, but no, these days, like Arnesian, for instance, it's not like I have a full glossary. The glossary grows with the series, and I write words for the glossary as I need them in the book. So it is a constantly evolving thing. As far as which comes first, characters or world, it depends. It used to always be world. Because I write primarily about outsiders, I want to understand the insiders. Because I'm writing about people who are perpendicular to a world, who don't fit cleanly into it. I need to understand the people that do. In order to understand the people that do fit cleanly into their world, I need to understand the world that they fit cleanly into. So the world used to necessitate being first. Like the Four Londons came first, and then I figured out Kell and Lila. The exception to it is character novels, like Addie, LaRue, and like Bones. I never thought I would write a character novel because it scared the ever-loving shit out of me. Because why would I write a book about character? It's all internal. It's very scary. Where's the plot? And the plot comes second. And so in that case, in Addie and in Bones, it's all character. I write the people first. And then I tend to write like a conflict, a crux of an issue. With Lila, it's the deal with the devil. In Bones, I can't tell you what it, or with Addie, it's the deal with the devil. With Bones, I can't tell you, because it's like kind of the point of the entire thing. And I would get in trouble. But yeah, so but generally though, like I can't get very far without the world. That's my playground. Like the world breeds the conflict breeds the characters.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
So you've talked a couple times now about knowing side characters so much better than we actually get to see them. And I imagine that's the case as well for things like character dynamics or just other world building things. How do you decide between what gets shown when you know so much? Like how do you decide what matters and what's worth actually publishing?
That's the whole question, isn't it? Right? Like how do you pick what to show when you could show anything? You end up showing what tells you the most. So I pick the moments, like there are highlights and lowlights. Like I have to pick the moments that do the most work, if that makes sense. I have to pick the moments which are revealing in some way, the moments which have a point. Every scene in the book, whether it's a quiet scene or a loud scene, a small scene or a big scene, is there for a reason because it moves the plot or it moves the characters which move the plot. So you have to ask yourself, like I know vastly more about a character's life than I ever put on paper. What I'm choosing to put on paper are the cruxes, are the moments when their life changes course, the crossroads, or the moments when it feels like the world ends, or they die and are reborn in some way emotionally or psychically.
Hi.
Hi.
You've mentioned before that you take bits of yourself and put them in your characters. So, for instance, with Victor and Eli from Villains, the names are from your name, and from Henry, in Addie, you took a large part of yourself. Are there any examples of this in Shades of Magic or Threads of Power? And if so, do you have any?
Yeah. I mean, Lila is aspirational. So Lila is not who I am, but she's who I wish I was, specifically in relationship to fear. I wish I handled fear like Lila did, which is not to say that she doesn't feel it, but she just acknowledges it and does it anyway. I wish I had that kind of recklessness. I am so much more Kel. Like, I am earnest when I don't want to be. I am painfully neurotic. I am very loyal, and I overthink everything. And I am also Rye in the sense of feeling like I have to continuously perform in some way. Like I'm kind of wearing masks. Like Rye doesn't ever feel up to the task that he's presented with, and he has to do it anyway, and he's very scared in some way all the time, but he never wants to let anyone see. So those, like weirdly, Kel and Rye, it makes sense because that's the dynamic that I care so much about in those books. Yeah, there's a character in Threads, but you won't meet them yet. You have to wait.
Hi.
Hi.
So I love how you guys talked about in your books the theme of power, and I would argue that that's kind of pretty either directly or subtly woven throughout all of your books, at least all the ones I've read so far. Yeah. So I was wondering, what are some other themes that you would say like is woven throughout most, if not all, of your books, along with like the concept of power and the struggle with power?
I love this because I have written, as I said, 23 books, and it is a Venn diagram with exactly like one point of intersection, and that is death. Like specifically, death as a two-way street, death as a permeable boundary, as a villain to be conquered. Like my characters are always either defeating death or pushing it off or coming back from it. So death is like, especially given a genre bent, whether it's the Library of the Dead and the Archived, or the characters in their near-death experiences in Vicious, or Kel and Rye in this, or Addie preventing death. It's a common factor. It's a common through line in all of my books.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, someone stole my question right before I got here, and now
okay.
I'm improvising. But do you ever write anything that you know you're not going to use? Like, do you write outside of what you think you're actually going to put into the story intentionally?
Ooh, not intentionally. Like I'm not a person who like sits down and interviews my characters, extraneously. I try, because I'm somebody who like just really wants everything to be for a purpose. I try to be as economical with the work in that way. There are obviously scenes that get cut. There are obviously scenes that get condensed. But I don't purposefully sit down and write something that I don't intend to use, with the exception of like a couple short stories or scenes that I knew didn't fit into a book. And even still, part of me is like, maybe I'll just make it a book, though. Like, maybe it can just grow into a book. How about you? Do you write purposefully?
I write backstory like it is a hobby.
Really?
Mainly because, this book is only my 5th.
Yeah.
And so I'm very early. I'm still learning my process, and it's my first trilogy. But I've written about 300,000 words.
Of backstory?
From different characters' perspectives in the world and the history of the world, because it has such a vast history. And I was like, well, I wanted to know, when the upper council died, why did they all die? And
do you plan on any of it becoming like flashback or backstory, or like only forward motion?
I hope, like you were saying, I hope to use it. I'm realizing that in book 2, because I feel like in a trilogy, book 1 kind of sets up everything, and then book 2 is chaos. Mm-hmm. So in book 2, I'm able to like plant some of those things. Yeah. But I'm like, gosh, it'd be a fun like novella.
Yeah.
Or something.
This is the problem. We're used to like everything needs to have a purpose.
Right.
So we're like, but writing without a purpose, what?
What do I do?
I think I try and do the backstory and get it all in a way that I can then like put into the book. Like I try and couch it all as either flashback or as like origin story. Yeah. To be very fair though, the entire origin story that I wrote for Victor and Eli became Vicious. Vicious was not actually supposed to be about Victor and Eli. It was supposed to be about a different dude who like comes to the city, and then both Victor and Eli try to get him to join their team. And then I was like, who are these dudes? And then I went and like sat down to write a whole backstory for them that just became Vicious because it was more interesting to me than this other dude. So like I have accidentally stumbled into story that way. But usually I'll sit down and I'll be like, can I find a way to tell the backstory that serves the book so that the reader can have it too? But then it might also just be that I am a haggard crone inside, and I'm like, why waste words? Like, why have words I can't
want them
use?
all.
I want to use these words. But I will like sit with, here's the thing, I don't have any trunked novels. I've never started a novel that I haven't finished. But I have ideas that aren't ready yet. And so I will put an idea back on the the quiet burner on my stove if it's not ready to be written yet. So I have a lot of like low simmering pieces that I haven't necessarily found the place for them, but I will find the place for them. But in the meantime, I need all my words. I need them to write Threads of Power and Bones and Victorious, and there are like already not enough hours, and I am so desperate to like find the words to use them all. And on that note, I think we have all survived. Yeah. We've all survived this wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Jess, thank you.
This is delightful.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you all so much.